Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to those joining us from the morning and from yesterday, and welcome to those who just tuned in as well. My name is Saba Azeem, and I work for PAX in the Protection of Civilians team on our Human Security Survey project in Iraq. Before I introduce your facilitator for this session, I would like to go over some of the notes for our conference platform, as well as some housekeeping items. As those who've joined us since morning or since yesterday, please take a tour of the virtual platform to acquaint yourself with the full conference program, as well as our speakers. Note that the event will involve a series of different types of session formats, including live virtual panels and presentations, pre-recorded messages from the field to minimize connectivity issues, interactive Q&A and discussions, lots of breakout sessions, as well as live polls to keep it as interesting as possible. Please engage actively to provide and receive as much of these sessions as possible. And of course, we also want to foster a lot of networking via this conference platform. First, you have the meet and greet tab up there where you can see a list of all registered attendees. From here, you can search for individuals who are currently available online and send them direct messages. And even schedule meetings with them or video calls with them bilaterally via the platform at any time during the actual conference. If you've not already done so, we also encourage you to edit your own attendee profile and add in a photo, update your details in the bio, and determine whether you want to change what information is visible to all participants in the meet and greet networking space. The platform also hosts networking islands where we invite you to visit during the platform's coffee and lunch breaks, though they will be open throughout the conference as well. These are virtual reality-ish spaces where you can congregate with your fellow attendees around themes of common interest on a tropical island, which is very nice for us given the cloudy weather here in the Netherlands. Note that this feature, however, only works in Google Chrome. The last section of the platform is the resource library, where you can find a lot of valuable resources that we've curated by themes associated with each of the 3 days of the actual conference. And you can find both general and more content-specific resources, and then you can also then bilaterally engage with people who submitted them in the meet and greet function. Just some additional housekeeping items. If you're encountering any technical issues during the actual conference or the event, you can actually, there's a live help desk available every day during the event itself. You can also find the help desk in the drop-down menu of the conference homepage. We also encourage you to post about the event as well as interesting takeaways on social media and other platforms. If you do so via Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram, we encourage you to use the hashtag PAX, POC 2020, and to tag PAX, POC, or PAX for Peace, as well as any participating individuals, organizations, speakers, etc. Similarly, if you capture any images or quotes, we also ask you to please attribute the information accordingly. Please remember all sessions are being recorded and will be posted publicly after the conference. And last but not the least, I would like to we would like to extend our thanks to the Department of Stabilization and Humanitarian Affairs at the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs for their generous support to PAX's Protection of Civilians program. And we also want to thank all of you in advance for your active participation in today's events, and of course, the speakers and the panelists. I now invite Shivan, the facilitator, just to give a brief introduction to him as well. He joined the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, or SIPRI, as a researcher this year, where he's pursuing research on local peace and conflict in Iraq, as well as regional trends of political upheaval within the Middle East and the Northern Africa region. Prior to joining SIPRI, he was a project specialist with the United States Institute of Peace, where he worked on drivers of social and political discord and barriers to return and resilience for the internally displaced and minority groups. He's also lived in Honolulu in Hawaii as part of his resident fellowship at the East West Center in the fall of 2016. He recently also completed his MSc of Politics of the Middle East at the University of London in 2018. Over to you, Shivan.
Thank you very much, Saba. Thanks for the introduction and also for the people that are joining us. So we are having a very interesting panel on the challenges of community engagement during uncertainty in post-conflict and fragile Iraq. I now present you the format of the discussion. We will have 4 speakers, 3 Iraqis and also the ambassador of Netherlands in Iraq. The format that I'm going to be following is that we will have opening remarks from each speakers, and then we will play a short video that we have pre-recorded from the speakers. To introduce you the context, Iraq is already facing its worst financial crisis in years and was dealt a blow by plummeting oil prices and COVID pandemic earlier this year. In November, after months of struggle, the parliament finally approved a deficit law that allows the government to borrow 10 billion US dollars, which would allow the government to pay its civil servants for the next 3 months. The interim government of Prime Minister Mustafa Al-Kadhimi continues to struggle to avert a complete economic collapse. Moreover, Iraq also continues to struggle with protracted insecurity and political instability stemming from complex dynamics at the national and subnational level, but also interacting with instability in a broader fragility in the Middle East and North Africa region. This has all given to rise in reported abuse and violence against civilians and vulnerable populations, such as the internally displaced persons. And despite the territorial defeat of ISIL 3 years ago in 2017, insecurity has remained constant throughout much of the previously held occupied territories by ISIS. Demonstrators continue to despite the increase in violence against peaceful demonstrations. And to unpack all these issues, I'm joined by a panel of experts from Iraq. I will now introduce the first speaker. Ali Al-Assad is the country director of Center for Civilians in Conflict, where he provides thought leadership and leads and manages advocacy and technical assistance to government, armed actors, and communities around accountability, trust, and participation to address protection concerns. He also develops sustainable relationship with relevant stakeholders and oversees research and studies, as well as leading high-level advocacy. I believe we have now Mr. Ali Al-Assad with us. If so, please provide your opening remarks. Ali, can you hear me? Well, in that case, we can start by playing the video that we already have pre-recorded from Mr. Ali Al-Assad.
Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Ali Al-Assad, the Iraq Country Director for the Center for Civilians in Conflict. CIVIC works to support communities affected by conflict in their quest for protection and strengthen the resolve and capacity of armed actors to prevent and respond to civilian harm, bringing about a significant reduction in conflict-related civilian harm is CIVIC's goal for the upcoming 5 years. The civilian harm mitigation, community-based protection, and the protection of civilians from other actors are CIVIC's main approach that enhanced by our advocacy and research to further protection outcome,
which are led by that
for civilians. CIVIC's community protection is about engaging with communities to facilitate access to decision makers and make government and security actors responsive. CIVIC has facilitated the creation of 4 community protection groups in Mosul, Sinjar, Hawija, and Kirkuk, which are led by a diverse set of community representatives, where 42% of whom are women, that work to identify and develop solutions to address civilians' urgent protection needs. Lack of confidence in the security forces, the fear to report protection threats, the lack of formal communication mechanisms between civilians and security forces
Well, apologies for the bad connection, and apparently that even we have a pre-recorded video from Mr. Ali Al-Assad, but I think due to the limited bandwidth, we have technical issues playing that. I'm wondering if Mr. Ali Al-Assad can hear me. Can you hear me, Mr. Ali?
Yes, I can hear you, Shivan. I do apologize for this also, though. This is not within my hands, so I can go briefly about what we are doing for the sake of time.
Yeah, it would be great. Can you please summarize the message that you wanted to convey through the video that we have already tried to play?
Yes, thank you very much. So aside of that we are in civic supporting communities affected by conflict and the request for protection and strengthening the resolve and capacity of armed actors to prevent and respond to civilian harm, we are bringing about a significant reduction in conflict-related civilian harm, which is our goal for the upcoming 5 years. Beside the community-based protection that we are focusing on, the civilian harm protection and protection from other actors, protection of civilians from other actors, are CIVIC's main approach that enhanced by advocacy and research to contribute to improve protection outcomes for civilians. Here I will focus on the community-based protection, that it's about engaging with communities to facilitate access to decision makers and make government and security actors responsive. CIVIC so far has facilitated the creation of 4 community protection groups in Mosul, Sinjar, Hawija, and Kirkuk, which are led by the diverse set of community representatives, where 42% of whom are women, that work to identify and develop solutions to address civilians' urgent protection needs. There are a lot of reasons behind engaging, behind CIVIC engaging with the communities. There is first the lack of confidence in security forces and authorities, fears to report protection threats, lack of formal communication mechanism between the civilians and security forces and authorities, the stigmatized image of female officers and the lack of female officers during operations within the security forces, and the discriminating and harassing entire communities of the perceived to be ISIS affiliated, or those families with members that perceived to be with ties with the ISIS. Through working with communities, CIVIC identified few risks and developed mitigations. The first risk was selecting the CPG members. So we worked on ensuring diversity, providing, empowering them, and strengthen their capacity to go publicly and to reach out to different armed actors and authorities, and also to introduce them to stakeholders working within the protection era. The other challenge that so we provided further empowerment to the female members to overcome restrictions, and final one, that members of the community protection groups were sometimes harassed by intelligence and armed actors, and CIVIC still working to introduce the community protection groups to armed actors and authorities. Part of the successes that the community protection groups achieved so far, the improvement in access to the compensation process in Iraq, and and they've been able to influence the referral for investigation by commanders, by security force commanders for mistreatment of civilians. Another achievement was the creation of hotline for civilians to report threats and forces. And the last one, that the MENA provincial government issued I am more than happy to, if you have any question, and I do apologize again for the connectivity issue.
Well, thank you for your opening remarks, and we will have questions. I will get back to you. Stay with us. And I'm now the second speaker next to Mr. Jamal Al-Jawaheri, who is one of the founders of Iraq's Al-Amal Association, a reputable, non-partisan, non-sectarian civil society organization that works to build capacity and raise awareness around social issues in pursuit of peace, sustainable development, and gender equity, and also the respect and upholding human rights and human rights principles. Mr. Jamal Al-Jawaheri has served as Iraqi Al-Amal Association's executive director since January 2015, and before that he has served as the organization's public relations and financial secretary, and he's also a main contributor to the drafting of the legislations of NGOs in both Iraq and the Kurdistan region of Iraq. I wonder if Mr. Jawaheri can hear my voice. We're going to first hear from you to provide your opening remarks, and then we will play your video recording, unless we will have challenges to hear from you. Mr. Jamal? Well, let's go to play the video first then, until we will have resolved that connectivity issues with Al-Jawaheri. Mr. Jamal, can you hear me? Make sure that your mic is on. It has to have a green button next to the mic. Well, all right, if we can try to play the video next.
Iraq during the violence or the war with Iran, and after that
sanctions, I can say even the occupations after 2003 faced a lot of continuous problems of unrest driven by security, economic, political, and social challenges and others. And that's the problems prevent and delay the state building, even that they stopped in some areas with a lot of damage in the Iraqi, I can say, build the new state. The mass or the violence during the ISIS, that's last 5-6 years, and the others militias influence make this unstable, I can say, country or unstable community with a lot of, I can say, with a lot of problems, with a lot of mass of lose the high level or high level elites and even the other community. The result of these problems with corruptions and with, I can say, delay in this less participations in community participation to develop the policies, it's affected to have less, we can say, NGOs or the other groups participate in decision making. I can say you can see that's very clear during the COVID-19 with the government. They have no any ideas or no strategic thinkings how to build or how to respond to the COVID with the other communities and with the other stakeholders. That's also not only with the federal level, I can say also with the governorate level, with very low or no any community consultations with the stakeholders, especially with the groups of academics, group of civil society or the other elite, to build a new policy or to have them that's a lot of influence they can have and build a new state. According to the study we did with the Innsbruck University as Al-Amal, that's to find this the good road to build this peace or to see what is the problems. It's share with us the same ideas, especially during the protest, which came the result of this problem of this cases as no trust between community and government. I can say during the COVID-19 we can say very good response from the civil society and youth groups, the volunteers group, to respond to the a lot of needs, the community needs. That you can see the report done by director of NGOs with the Iraqi cabinet. More than 4 million Iraqi they are benefit from the civil society or youth groups respond to the COVID in different areas of needs. With the also active on social media to build good we can say communications with the community, to have less violence, to have less war, to have good dialogue between all the stakeholders. I can say the Iraqi NGOs, they have good experience in advocacy. They during the last years, especially with adopted the Iraqi NGOs law 2010 and the child protection policy 16 or 17 with the now drafting protection from domestic violence law, or the now with the freedom of expressions they are fighting a lot to have very good law. Now it's the digital crimes. But all times I can say they do a very good job, and they I can say shortens the space between government and the with parliament, with the civil society. But the response till now it's weak, and we need a lot to encourage government to listen to the NGOs and the other stakeholders. Again, I can say what's the role of civil society with the volunteers group. They did, I can say, very good job to break the wall between the governorate, and you can see now it's easy to have activities in each governorate participate between the different ethnic, religious and ethics groups. That's for us it's really a good time to see that the diversity again started to see in some areas in Iraq where they are they are with one groups to respect others. That's the very good role or indicator. They can see the empowerment or the civil society and volunteers group. They can build a new culture in Iraq. Thank you very much.
Well, excellent. Now I hope Mr. Al-Jawaheri can hear me. I don't know if you can hear us.
Yes, please. I think you hear me now.
Yes, Mr. Jawaheri, you talked about a lot of themes, such as, for example, the breakdown of trust between the population and the ruling elite, and also the lack of strategy and response plan on behalf of the government, for example, at the outset of the COVID pandemic. And then you also talked about the civil society initiatives, how they have stand up and covered, actually, provided a lot of advocacy and provided a lot of thought leadership to disseminate information about containing the spread of the virus and some of the other challenges that you have laid down. How do you describe the situation now with 11 months to the pandemic? How has things played out since March?
Good afternoon again. I am sorry for that connection, but I think now I can say the civil society, they are also in different troubles. Even they do really till now, it's excellent job. According to the response to the COVID-19, also to break the wall between the governorates and with the other ethnics and religious groups, where they do a really very good job. But the others, it's less funded to the NGOs, and also this with during the, I can say, demonstrations, they have a lot of challenges with violence against demonstrators and against activists. They have threats from some militias and some the others. With that, I can say with the new civil society, they are new groups. They are youth volunteers groups where they are playing very important roles within the Iraqi community, within the Iraqi stakeholders. I can say in the governorate like Anbar, Diyala, Baghdad, Najaf, Basra, they are very active, but they need, I can say, more support, more, I can say, institutional governance, what they can do in very good way. That's the culture of the corruption, the cultures of the another bad things they need. We need to work on it a lot. With that, I can say the situations, it's unstable. They do good job with other challenges from government of other, I can say, public or security forces. With the very weak, now I can say, government, we are in the middle of challenges and good work. I don't know how can I explain, but that's really challenges. Thank you.
It sounds clear. We will come back to you towards the end of the panel. I will now go to the next speaker with us. Is now Mr. Sajad Jiyad, who is a visiting fellow with the Century Foundation. Sajad Jiyad Iraqi political analyst based in Baghdad. He's a former managing director for Al-Bayan Center and Iraq Policy Institute, and as well as a former visiting fellow with the Middle East and North Africa program at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Sajad's main focus is public policy and governance in Iraq, and he also works on capacity building of public institutions, civil society organizations through conferences, workshops, and training programs. Sajad, you can hear me. Let's change this a bit. Let's have your opening remarks first before we go to the video. Tell us actually in your opening remarks about the state of play. How do you see the situation in the country at the moment where you are in Baghdad?
Thank you, Shivan. I hope you can hear me and see me clearly. I apologize if there's any connection issues. I think at the moment, by and large, people feel that there is a void, that the government is not doing enough to engage with communities, that the domestic NGOs are not doing enough to support communities, and that the international community, international organizations and NGOs are likewise also not doing enough. I think at the local level, people look for a number of solutions, one of which is support for young people, the younger generations, who are desperate at the moment. They're looking for more opportunities. And there is a number of things that they look for, things such as training, support for finding employment, even some basic things that they've found themselves needing, like support for developing their CVs. They're teaching them how to organize and teaching them how to become community leaders, for example. They had this experience through COVID-19 throughout the year where they've had a lot of time on their hands, but unfortunately haven't been able to utilize it well because some of the infrastructure is not there, but also in general because I think they feel that they lack some of the skills. Certainly the government is just overwhelmed with the amount of crises on its hands, and it doesn't have the ability or maybe even the vision to try to work with young people to develop their skills. And also the issues that we have beyond just developing talent of young people, the issues around community tensions, the issues around the lack of security for a lot of people, especially people who are politically active, the issues around, for example, the fact that the country seems to be heading to a cliff economically, and the amount of psychological pressure that's putting on people, the mental pressure that's putting on families. I think there is a complete void there. Neither the government is doing that, nor do we have a strong NGO culture domestically here in Iraq. And I think that applies for everywhere. Yes, there's been some tremendous work being done for humanitarian reasons, working with IDPs, and which is a critical issue. But also generally in Iraq, I think there are a lot of other issues that unfortunately we haven't seen a lot of engagement on. So for now, I think the situation is just one of desperation for a lot of communities out there.
Now, before we play your video, which you actually outline a lot of challenges and also a lot of lessons for community engagement with Iraq internally and for external actors as well. But could you also give us an updated picture of where the politics or the political situation is? And we know that the country is supposed to head to the polls in June 2021, and the Prime Minister is pushing and has set the deadline already. He's already facing a lot of challenges with, as you said, uptake in violence against peaceful demonstrators. Could you give us a picture where the political situation is at the moment?
Yes, sure. I think the fact is the tensions are increasing across the board, whether it's security, whether it's politically, whether it's engagement with protesters, economically, of course. I think we have a tremendous amount of challenge in terms of restoring confidence in the system, telling young people and telling demonstrators, but just telling Iraqis generally across the board that things will improve. I think they can see the fact that our economy is struggling. We're very much dependent on oil, and oil prices look like they're not going to climb up to the levels they were. Our population is growing by around 1 million a year, and more people are coming into the labor market without jobs and without the hope of jobs being offered in the future. The private sector is very weak. We have corruption, rampant in pretty much every sector. I think they feel that this temporary government of Kadhimi's is not going to be up to the job in terms of trying to improve security, trying to reduce political tensions, which involve Iraq, unfortunately, whether it's with Iran or the US, and also trying to establish fully and uphold the rule of law to make sure that only the government is able to to bring people to justice, or is the only one that's able to have manpower on the streets and to use to use weapons and violence and so on. Unfortunately, all of these are not happening at the moment, and that's taking away from people's confidence in this system. I think heading into elections, people are starting to worry that the elections won't be free and fair. They'll be tainted as in previous elections, but also that what is the point of elections? Even if they are free and fair, what is actually going to be the result of these elections? We have a parliamentary system that usually produces a coalition. Usually everybody gets a seat at the table. There is no winner in the Iraqi elections per se, and there's no loser. And when you have these coalition governments, they tend to be weak, and then that's the impetus for reform is also very, very weak. And I think people are now starting to get the idea that actually maybe, if I vote or I don't vote, it's not going to make a difference. Things will continue as they are, the status quo. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things to worry about is if people do not end up voting. Last elections in 2018, we only had 44.5% turnout. If that trend continues from the previous election and the one before, where it's been reducing every time, then perhaps we'll have only a small number of people participating in the elections. What does that mean for the legitimacy of the system? Especially when you have a lot of people still demonstrating, and especially since we expect demonstrations and potentially violence to continue as the situation gets worse. I think it's a big question that unfortunately I can only have pessimistic answers for at the moment.
Well, now we have established the context. Let's hear from your video, which is basically very connected to the topic of the conversation of today as well, which is about the challenges of community engagement during the times of uncertainty and the post-conflict Iraq, the context that you have just explained to our audience. Let's hear from the video recording about the challenges for community engagement during uncertainty.
For inviting me to speak today on a very important topic, community engagement. I'm here in Baghdad in Iraq, where unfortunately we've had a year of protests that have led to violence against protesters, which have led to loss of life, and for young people, a loss of confidence in the future. Community engagement. I'm here. This is an important issue to discuss today about what the international community can offer in terms of engaging with Iraqi society, but also what young people want from these engagements. Across Iraq, whether it's central Iraq, southern Iraq, northern Iraq, or the Kurdistan region, we have a variety of communities facing different challenges and different issues, but also lack the engagement between communities themselves, and also lack engagement with the international community. And I think it is for us to study the pros and cons of such engagement and what we can offer to these communities when we do engage. My concern is, at this moment in time, Iraq is gearing up for national elections next summer. And ahead of those, a lot of people are concerned about what the results could be. What is the implications for the current ruling elite to maintain their grip on power, but also to become potentially stronger after these elections? What about the role of NGOs and community organizers and activists in this process? For us, I think the concern is, number one, that international engagement could offer legitimacy to the status quo. By being involved with political parties, by being involved with government, by working under the current conditions the country is facing, a lot of young people are concerned that this will give legitimacy to what has gone on before, but also to what will come. The second element is, if young people engage while there is concern about security, then they could potentially be liable for interventions by state security, but also they could put their lives at risk by engaging with international organizations. So even though we have the goodwill of engaging with communities here, we can also be putting them at risk if we don't understand exactly what the issues and challenges are that these communities face. So for young people, I think there is demand-driven call for engagement. They do want to see NGOs inside Iraq, but also international organizations come to Iraq, offer them opportunities, offer them trainings, offer them skills, offer them a way to get out of the current rut, so to speak. Because at this moment we have a high level of unemployment for young people. We have many of them struggling to earn the daily income or to survive. And unfortunately, COVID-19 has added to that. So I think any opportunity that comes about that allows young people to engage amongst themselves, to engage with the wider world, but also to engage with communities across the country, become or to survive. I think unfortunately, COVID-19. So there is demand from young people, especially for engagement. There is demand from various communities. We have, the burdens of war from, 4 or 5 years ago that are still being played out today. We still have issues with reconciliation, with security and peace for communities across Iraq. And I think that sort of engagement is very, very useful. Again, it has to be studied so that it does not offer legitimacy to, for example, some of these issues that have sidelined marginalized communities, around IDPs, around returnees, around the stigma of families who ended up under the rule of ISIS, for example. All of these add to a lot of the issues that communities face intra and inter community with other parts of Iraq or where they actually end up living. My concern, again, is that without a detailed plan of how to leave long-term legacy, any engagement could potentially be for the sake of engagement only. So I think there's three kind of reasons why we have engagement. Number one is engagement for the sake of it, because there's funding available, because this is what these organizations are able to do, because this is a traditional way of working inside a country. Number two is engagement due to demand, because society calls for it, because government wants it, because the issues on the table demand such attention. And number three is engagement because that is the right course of action, because that will lead to results. I think personally that the success comes when these three elements are combined, when you engage because that's what you do, you engage because that's what people want, and you engage because that's what will lead to results. Now, whatever projects are on the table, whether it's reconciliation, whether it's training, whether it's talking to young women, for example, or stigmatized part of a community in Iraq, for example, or bringing people together, whatever the project is, I think it has to have long-term legacy and achieve long-term results. Without these, I'm afraid that a lot of the projects that are done in Iraq are going to be band-aids for the solution. Temporarily they assist, but they leave no long-term impact. And I think that's what the country really needs. Something that works for the next decade. Something that will leave a lasting impact on a generation. So that the next generation of young people who eventually become the ones that are in power or the ones that lead this society have benefited from these projects. Without that, we're always going to be starting from scratch. So putting these elements together, I think there is a lot of potential for us to see some success in domestic engagement, but also international engagement. I think we can understand the risks quite well and dedicate some strategies to avoiding falling into a pitfall. And I think also that we can make sure that we're listening to young people especially, but to all communities that want engagement, to find out what it is that they want and what are they looking to achieve. So I wish everybody a really fruitful conference. I'm looking forward to the discussion. I'm looking forward to taking some questions on this. And I'm looking forward to listening to my fellow panelists as well on exactly what kind of engagement we're looking at in Iraq and the risks and the pros from doing so. Also to learn from everybody here about it. I'm looking forward to taking some questions on this. I'm looking forward to listening to my fellow panelists as well on exactly what kind of engagement we're looking at in Iraq and the risks and the pros from doing so. Also to
Well, thank you very much. And now we are joined by our final speaker, Mr. Michel Rentiner, who is a seasoned diplomat of the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He currently serves as the Netherlands ambassador to Iraq, and previously he served as deputy permanent representative to NATO in Brussels, as well as Netherlands climate envoy, as well as acting director for environment, climate, energy, and water in the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Prior to moving to Iraq, Mr. Michel Rentiner was a civil military interface advisor at the NATO Supreme Headquarters, Allied Powers in Europe. Mr. Ambassador, welcome for joining us. Can you hear me?
Yes, okay.
Could you please give us your opening remarks?
Yes. Well, basically, on the subject of the protection of civilians, of course, my main point is, and I presume you will still play the pre-recorded video. My main point is that it's not something that we can do from the outside. That's why it's so crucially important to really understand the situations on the ground and to work on the local solution, localized approach, let's say. That, I think, is the main thing. Well, don't quote me on this one, but obviously many international actors in the world have done many things slightly less informed, let's say, let's put it diplomatically. And we are strong believers in actually tackling issues like this very much in a localized way. I think that is the main point that I would like to make. No solutions from the outside. Solutions should be homegrown and based on the situation in the country itself.
Well, Mr. Ambassador, that's very helpful, as you've emphasized on solutions have to be coming from homegrown solutions and with consultation with the partners on the ground and the communities. How do you help? I suppose my question would be, how do you push the Iraqi political elite to basically navigate those storms and to put the protection of civilians and protection or security concerns at the heart of their programming and their day-to-day activities?
In many ways, some of it is overt, some of it is a little bit more behind the scenes, of course. We often use very public means of transmitting those messages that can be made in statements, that can be done on, for instance, now at the moment, the whole discussion about the closure of the camps, the IDP camps, is an example like that. But obviously, as diplomats, you also need to be able to speak to Iraqi politicians and leaders and ministers in a more closed way and try to get to a solution together and try to find the middle between what is necessary in this country, this particular country, and what is necessary from an international perspective. So there are many different ways of doing that.
That's great. Let's see if we can play your pre-recorded video. And I would like to also remind the audience that are joining us remotely that Mr. Ambassador and also Sajad Jiyad will be leaving at 15 CET. So if you have any questions, please do type them in the question and answer box. We will first address those questions pointed to Mr. Ambassador and also Sajad Jiyad. Let's see if we can play the video now.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to speak here on this seminar on the protection of civilians, an important subject for us. Iraq, of course, is a fascinating but also rather complex country, historically diverse, but also at times severely divided. These divisions are a result of many cycles of violence in the past decades and resulting from sometimes local, regional, but also international conflicts fought on Iraqi soil. And during all these cycles of violence and conflict, Iraqi people had to seek protection and refuge multiple times. And when talking about protection, it's not only talking about physical danger and violence, but also having peace of mind, knowing where the next meal comes from, or providing a future for your children. And the absence of violence, unfortunately, is not the same thing as feeling safe and protected, and most definitely it's not the same thing as peace. So it's in this broader definition of protection that we need to address and discuss during this conference, including its psychological, economical, social, and cultural dimensions. An integrated approach to protection, we feel, is what is needed. And normally, communities rely on the state or militias, on tribal or other local structures for ensuring their safety and their protection. However, as many of those structures, one way or another, have been partly responsible for, or at least involved in, conflict in Iraq, the reality is that the Iraqi people have often been left on their own to ensure their protection. And here I have to underscore something which is very important. It needs to be very clear that protection, of course, is not something that the international community can somehow miraculously provide or do. It is the Iraqi people who are the first responders in times of crisis and a source of continuing support. They make decisions in order to protect themselves by fleeing, by sometimes pledging political affiliation, or in some cases even taking up arms themselves. And conflict also leads to many terrible side effects, such as child marriaging, child labor, and we need to encounter those as well. But the local community is the best positioned to define and to identify its own protection concerns. So the role of the international community should be to support those localized solutions with the community rather than imposing external measures. And with the enormous divisions in Iraq, society community-based protection initiatives are both a major challenge, but potentially also a solution. Let me start with the challenge. It's a challenge because we need to understand and take into account the social divisions in Iraqi society. The social boundaries that define Iraq's social fabric have been crystallized, softened, diffused, and recreated many times. In the last few decades, boundaries between Iraqi people have been defined over either tribal affiliation, religion, ethnicity, political affiliation, or military affiliation, other ideologies, the area of origin, or displacement. So depending on the moment in time, it determines which boundaries are most important, and it determines social dynamics. We need to understand those dynamics. What divides the Iraqi people, and what do these divisions mean? People sometimes living peacefully as neighbors for many years may have ended up on different sides of these conflict lines. And all of this impacted the social fabric and broke down trust. The trust within and between societies, but also the lost trust in the government. And in some instances, even the highly important tribal structures and mechanisms are not fully fit for purpose anymore to deal with certain divisions, such as how to deal with the return of families who are perceived to be affiliated with Daesh in Iraq. However, especially in such situations, community-based protection can also be a solution. It helps communicate, to re-engage, to facilitate dialogue and share their concerns, and understand that not only themselves, but others have been impacted and affected by the conflict. So it helps to organize local communities and make them agents of their own protection. And at the same time, communities need to be empowered to make their concerns known to the state. So government needs to listen to those communities' demands and put addressing those concerns central rather than political gains. So the Netherlands does this through community policing and community-based protection activities, because we believe this is where the role for the international community lies. We need to give more attention to local capacities to deal with crisis. Firstly, as I mentioned, to support local communities to become agents and put them central in protection concerns. But secondly, also to help the government through security and justice institution building, training and advocating for priority setting in addressing those concerns. In the end, we feel the government needs to regain and re-earn the trust of society for legitimate and sustainable stability in Iraq. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is what I think is very much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ambassador. That was very interesting remarks. I hope we will have questions from the audience now. Now we are going to open it, and thank you for bearing with us to go through these technical issues. I have a question, but I don't know which panelist is this question addressed to. So I am reminding our audience that Mr. Ambassador will leave at 15 CET as well as Sajad Jiyad. So I'm going to direct this question to Sajad perhaps. The question is, what can people abroad do to connect to training or on training to young people in Iraq? And also, what sorts of economic injections into the community do you recommend, or how people could help, for example, from the outside?
Sorry, just to clarify, Shivan, was that question to me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thanks. So I think, the big challenge that we have in the country at the moment is the demographic challenge. The population is growing. Every year, about 750,000 people enter the job market, and unemployment is growing by almost 700,000 per year because the public sector and private sector create very little. And we have already 3.5 million people who are not in employment, education, or training. So they're doing nothing. They're sitting at home. So the biggest need right now, I think, is to stop this situation from getting worse. And from a recent survey that I did and a report that I published, we heard a lot from young people talking about the fact that they have time in their hands, they want to do training, they want to learn how to become entrepreneurs or to start their own business, or, for example, to pick up new skills so that will allow them to develop their own ideas or to try to enter the private sector. And unfortunately, they complain about the lack of support from government, but also from domestic and international NGOs on this front. They just felt that there was not enough outreach, especially when we looked at cities like Nasiriyah or Basra, which have had protests for over a year now, and unfortunately sometimes seen clashes there. People feel very, very left behind. They feel disconnected and disenfranchised. So I think we have to think about what ways can we support these young people. We can't give them jobs. We can't, directly solve Iraq's economic problems. But how can we make these young people feel that there are ways for them to, tap into the potential of entering the private sector, or to feel that there is somebody out there willing to provide them an opportunity, or to help them develop those leads into an opportunity?
Now, Ambassador Rentiner, would you like to add on this? Because
yes, please.
Netherlands is doing something about that in Iraq.
Exactly. No, it's our philosophy very much for our annual plan. Let's say what we do in Iraq is stability, long-term stability is our main goal. And that is directly linked to exactly what Sajad is saying, this enormous amount of young people constantly coming into the labor market. So work and income is very much a pillar of our program. Now, obviously, we can't change that completely, but one of the things that massively needs to change is this oil dependency of this country. And this is also part and parcel of the white paper, of course. And one of the things that we happen to be good at, Dutch people, is two things: water and agriculture. Everyone knows that. All the jokes in the world about water, living below the dikes and everything, they're all about Dutch people. So what we try to do is supply a lot of training, bring lots of Iraqis to the water institutions in Delft, the agricultural institutions in Wageningen. And before Corona, we used to do it live. Now we do it online. But it's not just that. That is actually a segment of population that's already working. What we do below that is, for instance, a program called Orange Corners. It actually selects young people, and it is such good fun. I was actually at their site about a month ago, where they identified 20 new young people. They have the most fantastic, bright, young, new ideas. What they miss is the skill to make that into a business plan. So we train them how to do that. But what they also miss is that next link to some form of finance, some capital to invest in their idea. So we're also putting money into that. And with that, I have absolute faith in the youngsters' population of Iraq, actually. This is a country that can run itself. You just need to put a few of those injections in, and then we can do a lot. But I trust also a lot on diversifying this economy, because with oil, it's not going to work in the long end. We need to change the economy of the country and start doing things. My God, it's a shame this country was the country of water. As a child, I learned about this, the two big rivers. This is where our society, culture comes from. Nowadays, there's hardly a drop of water that reaches Basra. This is something that we need to work on. Change the economy. There's so much to do. This country has people, land, lots of sun. You can grow stuff here. You don't have to import cheap stuff from your neighbors. This can be an enormous economic motor.
Well, this is about the economic drivers of the political discontent, as you and Sajad are referring to. But could you also, to bring it back to the subject that we are here for, the broader image of civilian security, that especially at this important juncture that Iraq is navigating through, there is on a daily basis reports and news reports of basically harms towards peaceful populations and peaceful demonstrators, or the closure of camps, and a lot of concerns that I believe you have messaging. You also have working with other partners, INGOs, Dutch INGOs such as PAX for Peace in the country to basically storm this weather. Could you please also give us some of your thoughts about that before before you leave us?
You're asking me.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. No, maybe you were asking Sajad as well.
No.
Obviously, that's as I said. This working income is one important pillar. Another important pillar is human rights and the safety, as you were referring to. So definitely, we push for the accountability, for instance, on what happened to unfortunately 500 to 600 demonstrators that were killed last year. But also the journalists, the assassinations that have taken place. We push very much for that accountability to take place. Obviously, we're not there yet. The world is watching, and I am part of that world. So I take my role in that, absolutely, very much so.
We have also a question from our audience that's towards you. It says, how can we as international community accommodate national political interests and also community needs in a coherent manner? This question is to you, Mr. Ambassador.
I didn't understand the question. Sorry, the line broke.
I will repeat it again. How can we as international community accommodate national political interests and community needs in a coherent manner?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. Well, you can try to make perfect, but perfect often is the enemy of good. I am not going to say that there are not differences between different parts of the international community. Anyone who's ever worked with the UN knows that there is not one UN, but there is 20 different UNs. And the same is true for countries. But sometimes diversity can be beautiful as well. I think Iraq is actually a country that is very, let's say, educated and clever in the way it plays the international community. Iraqi politicians are very skilled and they know exactly what to ask by whom. So that is not necessarily the problem. And unfortunately, it's also not a problem because of the breadth and the depth of the problems. There is so much that needs to be fixed in this country in terms of social divisions, tribal divisions, sectarian divisions, economic divisions, all of it. There is so much to do that there is no lack of things that need to be done. And we should all work in our niche. I will never claim that my country can solve all problems, but if you want to do something on terms of water, agriculture, and stuff like that, yeah, I'm the guy to talk to. If you want to do something else, talk to another country.
But
the coordination of that is always very, very problematic.
Very good. Very, very nice to hear your thoughts about that. Let me actually bring back our two other panelists, Mr. Ali Al-Assad. I don't know if he can hear me. Ali Al-Assad, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes, I can hear you. Mr. Asaf? Well, in that case, I'm going to pose the question to also to the rest of the panelists. Something that I wanted to bring him up from the intervention that Mr. Asaf provided us is basically the community protection groups, and I wanted to ask him some of the challenges or the protection concerns that they have managed to resolve through these community groups. I don't know if Mr. Asaf can hear me.
I can hear you, and I do not know whether you hear me or not.
Yeah, I can hear you very well. Could you please give us some examples of the challenges or some of the positive stories or the solutions that the community protection groups managed to resolve with the security actors in the locations that you have mentioned in Hawija, Kirkuk, Sinjar, and Mosul?
Shivan, your voice is still broken, but I do not know whether I heard the full question regarding the community protection groups and the solutions that they've been able to develop in cooperation with the security forces. Is that your question?
Yes, give us some solutions, give us some positivities.
First, and as Mr. Ambassador said, that if it is not a community-specific solution, then it will not be doable to be implemented. This is first. Second, it is a case by case. For example, in Kirkuk, they've been able to create a hotline in cooperation with the security forces in order to report any protection threats or the ill treatment of the security forces individuals. That kind of success encouraged the Ministry of Interior to have this line to be a national, on the national wide, and it is now available for any civilian to report. Other issue that it is not a common practice for the commanders to apologize or to refer their individuals within their units to investigation because of ill treatment. While through the advocacy of the protection of the community protection groups, they've been able to do so, and they've been able to convince the commanders that if there will be no fair investigation, if there will be no due process, then there will be no chance to fill the gaps between the communities and the civilians, and to rebuild the trust between both sides. Also, on the policies and best practices to protect the civilians, CIVIC is not leading these efforts on the community level, but it is the community protection groups who are leading, and we are co-leading these efforts in order to convince the local authorities to adopt policies, civilian protection policies, and best practices, mainly the armed actors within their communities.
That's very good. Let me actually also direct a question from the audience that we have to Mr. Jamal Al-Jawaheri. The question is, what is the role of faith leaders and religious figures in Iraq with regards to protection of civilians and some of the challenges that you have laid down in your intervention earlier during this session?
Okay, that's okay. Thank you, dear Ambassador, Mr. Ambassador.
The Ambassador is leaving us.
I need to go.
Once again, thank you very much again for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that's also very important to say. Yes, the religious figure, they can play a very big role, but unfortunately they don't. Yes, the majority, I can say, we have to be clear. They can play, now they're playing two roles, the majority of them. They can present themselves to the communities, international and local communities. They are accepted the dialogue discussions with the others. They accept others. In realistic, within the groups, their groups, they are not. There are very few groups of religious figures. They can do this with, they believe in that. They are really minorities, but they playing very big role, but in challenging space. The majority, they not allowed them to do social coexistence, to accept others. With ours, there's different groups, or we can say ethnics, cultures. They can do with some things really good on the realistic note, but also we have to spend another times to give them that more, I think, chances, but we have to do with them in different way. Like the different way, there's to promote them to do this in public and to do this indirect with their followers, not only to do presence in the media, I don't know, everywhere. they have to do different with, we can say, clear statement, what they have to do. Not to do fake statement. We are in a way with our experience during the ISIS time and after, before, they are not accept others. They are really different what they say.
Yeah.
We have to work them in different way to keep them away sometimes from the politicians, and they are doing with them very well, and majority they're under control of majority of, I can say, decision makers, especially the politicians. I am sorry to say that, but that's the realistic what we have to do. With the youth groups is different. Even with the religious youth groups, they are different. With the big figures, they do excellent job. They are accept others. They have to work with the others in good way. That's what I think we have to do in different ways. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Al-Assad. Let me get back to you. And now we have you on the video as well. Could you actually provide us some more remarks on basically some of the vulnerable groups that you are doing advocacy on behalf or on actually, such as we have heard earlier last month with the closure of the camps during the pandemic, and as we are heading into the winter. What sorts of advocacy and messaging do you disseminate, and how do you engage with the relevant stakeholders on that issue?
Okay. So first, Shivan, I have a comment on if you allow me. I have a comment on the religious leaders and the power dynamic within the community. And I am not talking about the national level. I am talking about the community level or provincial level. If we are missing the religious leaders within our analysis and the tribal leaders at the same time, then we are missing a huge part of the power that impact the community, I would say, dynamic, or impact the impression or how the community would feel about any issue. And if we've been able, if we can bring together the religious leaders again on the provincial or on the community level with the tribal leaders, then we can have a great momentum of support that can help us in order to reach our goal. On your question regarding the minorities and in light of closure of camps, you know that the closure of camps haven't impacted only the minorities, but generally speaking, the most vulnerable groups, which are the displaced people. So we are, as CIVIC, we are not advocating to the local authorities directly about this. Yes, we are amplifying the voice of civilians, but we are trying to put the community protection groups in front of us, because they can better represent the community than we as international NGO. So we are equipping them with the tools, we are empowering them, and we are developing the advocacy messages, and we are also not developing, we are helping them to develop the advocacy message, and we are helping them to develop their advocacy plan. And part of the composition of our community protection groups is the representative of minorities. So we made sure that within those groups are representatives of minorities in order to reflect the views or the voices of those groups.
That's wonderful. I am also aware that you've also mentioned earlier in your remarks some thoughts about the justice and also access, justice and reconciliation, and also access to compensations. Would you also like to give us an update on that? Like, how do you foresee, how do you envisage this now? Can you update us on the challenges to justice and reconciliation, and most importantly, in terms of compensation? As you said, many IDPs still remain displaced, and they're facing imminent camp closures and going back to their areas of origin. Maybe you could give us some remarks on that as well.
Regarding the reconciliation and from the compensation lens, because we are not working on the reconciliation, I mean, entirely like other organizations, but it is part of our work regarding the compensation. We are advocating directly to the central government and the provincial government to ease the access to the process and to make that a process fair and doable for each citizens. And we handled this task to the community protection groups. And I do not know whether you heard me saying that they achieved a lot of things regarding the enacting POC policies in areas, or a lot of improvement in accessing to the protection, to the compensation process, again from the protection lens.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much. And unfortunately,
I would, for the sake of time, I would refer you to one of the CIVIC's publications, which is about the compensation.
Thank you.
Specifically about the compensation.
Thank you very much. It's just because we don't have enough time to go through all these interesting points. Unfortunately, we have to end it there. I'm going to hand it back to Saba Azeem.
This is unfortunately all the time we have today. I'd like to thank all of our speakers today, as well as Shivan, Shivan joining us from Sweden, and all of our speakers joining us from Iraq. And also, I'd like to thank all our participants. We apologize for any technical difficulties. I suppose this is the second theme of 2020, technical difficulties, but we hope you will reach out to speakers and each other throughout networking spaces on the conference platform, particularly during the upcoming coffee break. I also hope that you can join us in the next sessions starting at 4 p.m. the Netherlands time. We will have 2 concurrent sessions. One will be led by myself, where I engage with Shivan and his colleagues in SIPRI as they examine local perceptions and understanding of human security. And at the same time, my colleague Anton will be engaging with Jan Pospisil from the Austrian Study Center for Peace and Conflict Resolution on the research that he's done with the USIP on how the signing of the revitalized agreement on the resolution of conflict in South Sudan has impacted everyday security of communities at several locations in South Sudan. Thank you very much, and see you very shortly.